You know, usually when we talk about a medical diagnosis or, I don't know, examining the blueprints of a physical machine,
Yeah.
there is this comforting expectation of absolute precision.
Right. It's binary. It's highly objective.
Exactly. I mean, you're dealing with engineering, you break your arm, the X-ray shows that jagged white line on the bone, and the doctor just points at the illuminated film.
Yeah, they just say, well, there it is. That's the problem.
Broken or not broken, it's clean. And like you said, it's comforting because we really like things to be visible.
We do. We want the universe to be categorized neatly, into a schematic we can just glance at and understand.
Right. But then you step into the world of human consciousness, or you start looking at civilizational history, or the neurodevelopment of human agency.
And suddenly that clean X-ray machine is completely useless.
Utterly useless. We're looking at a diagnostic landscape that is, well, it's incredibly murky.
It is the absolute definition of diagnostic muddy waters. And traditionally, if you look at the historical record, when humanity hits that murky water regarding our own existence, we just default.
Default to what exactly?
Mysticism. We default to superstition because, frankly, we lack the diagnostic tools to explain what we're actually looking at.
We just sort of throw up our hands and say, it's a ghost, it's magic.
Exactly.
And that is exactly what we are dismantling today. We are doing a forensic examination of a foundational text on civilizational design, specifically to explode that exact myth.
Yeah, we are. We're looking at a very specific cut of audio today. It's an Urdu lecture delivered in November 1979.
By the philosopher and scholar Ghulam Ahmad Parvez, right?
That's right. He's analyzing a focused section of the Quran, specifically Surah As-Sajdah, verses 5 through 9.
Now, before we even touch the text, we have to establish the framework for this deep dive.
All right.
Because the context here is just everything.
It really is.
If you, the listener, hear the word Quran or the word lecture and assume we're about to walk through like a theological sermon or indulge in some kind of religious sentimentality, I need you to completely erase that expectation.
Yeah, far from it. In this analysis, we are effectively putting on the hats of master sociologists and systems engineers.
Systems engineers. I love that framing.
It's crucial. Parvez's approach to this text is entirely rational. It's socioeconomic. We are reading these ancient verses purely as a highly sophisticated blueprint.
We're basically looking at them as a hardware and software specification of human cognitive architecture.
Precisely.
I really want to emphasize that systems engineer approach. We are looking at the specs. And the central mystery we are tackling the hook for this entire exploration is that deeply ingrained, incredibly superstitious idea.
The ghost in the machine.
Yes, the ghost in the machine. You know the concept. It's the classic immortal soul that supposedly just floats around inside us.
Totally disconnected from reason or biological evolution or physical law.
Exactly. And we're going to completely deconstruct that today.
What is truly fascinating here, I think, is the methodology Parvez uses to explode that myth. I mean, he doesn't rely on modern secular philosophy.
Right, or like 20th century neuroscience.
Exactly. He goes directly back to the 1400-year-old text itself. And he demonstrates that the text was never, ever talking about a metaphysical ghost.
It was describing the installation of a cognitive operating system.
Yes.
So we are essentially going to trace the hardware specification of the human agent. And the scope of this is just massive.
It's cosmic.
Literally cosmic. Parvez takes us from the macro design of the cosmos down into the biological mud and all the way up to the ignition of human consciousness.
It requires an enormous shift in perspective. And to even begin to understand the human agent, well, Parvez insists that we first have to understand the scale.
The scale and the engineering process of the macro system that this agent inhabits.
Exactly. He starts by pointing out a really profound linguistic distinction in the text between two distinct realms of operation, Alam-e-Amar and Alam-e-Khalq.
So, let's unpack those two terms, because they really set the foundation for everything else we're going to talk about. What is Alam-e-Amar?
If we look at this through the lens of systems design, any engineer or architect will tell you that the conceptual planning phase of a project is entirely distinct from the manufacturing phase.
Makes sense.
Parvez highlights that the Arabic language, particularly in this text, maintains a strict, unyielding vocabulary to separate these two phases.
So they don't mix them up.
Never. Alam-e-Amar translates to the realm of command, or, more accurately in this context, the realm of planning, conceptualization, and initial design.
So it's the blueprint phase. It's like the CAD drawing on the architect's computer.
Precisely. It is the architect's mind. It is the software code written out before it is ever compiled or run through a processor.
Oh, I see.
It represents the perfect abstract design of a universe or a system where all the governing rules, the physics, the natural laws are mathematically defined.
But an architectural drawing, no matter how perfect it is not a building. I mean, you can't live inside a blueprint.
Right. A blueprint has no physical friction. It's just information.
Exactly.
So then you must have Kalk. This translates to the realm of creation. But in a systemic framework, we should understand it as the realm of material execution.
The execution phase.
Yes, this is where the abstract blueprint meets the mud, the steel, the concrete, the biological cells. It is the grueling process of bringing the abstract plan into tangible, observable, physical reality.
And Parwes makes a really compelling historical point here, doesn't he?
He does. He notes that for centuries, theologians and laypeople alike collapsed these two distinct realms. They just blurred them together.
The traditional superstitious view was that God just said be, and everything, mountains, stars, animals, humans,
Right.
just physically popped into existence in its final finished form.
Like a magician pulling a fully formed rabbit out of a hat.
The poof theory of
It's
creation.
a poof theory, exactly. It's an intellectually lazy way of viewing the cosmos because it completely ignores the mechanics of reality.
But Parwes argues that the text itself specifically divides them. The plan, the Yudabbirul-Amr, yes, that is instantaneous. The conceptualization is immediate.
But the Kalk, the material execution of that plan, that is a phenomenally long, phased, and deeply physical process.
And this distinction brings us to an Arabic word that he zeroes in on, which I just found incredibly illuminating. Tadabbur.
Ah, yes, tadam.
Usually when you read standard translations of this text, tadabbur is given a very weak, almost passive translation. It's usually translated as pondering or like thinking deeply about something.
Which completely strips the word of its engineering force. The linguistic depth of Arabic roots is vital here. The root of tadabbur is dabara.
And what does that literally mean?
Literally, it refers to the end, the back, or the ultimate conclusion of a thing.
Okay.
So when applied in a systems engineering context, tadabbur doesn't just mean sitting under an apple tree and pondering the universe.
Right. It's not just daydreaming.
No. It means designing a system from the very beginning with the ultimate endpoint, the final destination, explicitly and mathematically in mind. It is reverse engineering the timeline.
Wait, let me make sure I'm fully grasping this. Reverse engineering the timeline.
Yes.
So you're saying the universe in this framework isn't just a system randomly rolling the dice to see what emergent properties pop up.
Not at all. That would be a system without tadabbur. Think of the Apollo moon missions.
Okay, the moon missions.
The engineers didn't just build a very big rocket, light the fuse, and say, let's ponder where this might end up.
That would be a disaster.
A total disaster. They defined the endpoint first, landing a human on the moon and returning them safely.
Right.
They mapped the precise orbital mechanics of where the moon would be on a specific date. Then they reverse engineered the entire process backward,
From the lunar module to the command module to the atmospheric reentry.
all the way back to the exact amount of fuel needed on the launch pad in Florida. That entire chain of causality, designed from the destination backward, that is tadabbur.
That is a phenomenal way to look at it. So the endpoint is flawlessly defined in the Alfa, the blueprint.
Exactly.
And the Kalk is just the physical universe running that massive, complex program to reach that specific, predetermined endpoint.
That's it, exactly. The execution phase is designed to reach the planned destination. And this directly leads us to verse 5, which Parwes analyzes to establish the sheer mind-bending scale of this execution.
Right, verse 5.
The verse states, quote, "He arranges each matter from the sky to the earth. Then it ascends to him in a day whose measure is 1,000 years of your reckoning."
Let's pause right there, because this is where a lot of ancient and modern interpretations just go entirely off the rails.
They really do.
Historically, when people read a phrase like "a day is 1,000 years," they immediately jump to science fiction or mysticism.
Oh, yeah, they think of supernatural time dilation.
Or like interstellar-style relativistic time stretching near a black hole. Or, more fondly, I think they just write it off as poetic hyperbole.
Just an ancient text's way of saying God is really, really old.
Right. But through Parwes's systemic lens, it is none of those things. It is a profound, incredibly grounded, and highly technical statement.
About the difference in scale between human perception and the actual consequence cycle of civilizations. What the text is defining here is an operational cycle.
Okay, explain what you mean by an operational cycle in this context.
Yeah.
How does a listener apply that to how they view the world?
Well, it means that as individual humans, we suffer from a massive structural perspective distortion.
Because we don't live very long.
Exactly. Our biological lifespan is incredibly short, maybe 80, 90 years if we are extremely lucky.
Yeah.
So when we look at history or society or the mechanics of justice, we view it through an incredibly narrow aperture. We look at a corrupt empire or a terrible political system, and we get incredibly frustrated.
We say, why does this unjust system last so long? Why do good initiatives fail?
Where are the consequences? The system must be broken, or the universe must be asleep.
Because we want the consequences to happen within our own 80-year window. We want the bad guy to fall and the good guy to win by the time we, retire.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We demand that civilizational justice conforms to a biological human lifespan. But Parwez is pointing out the system's actual metrics.
The real timeline.
Yes. Consequence is not slow because the system is broken or the architect is distant. Consequence feels slow to us because a human lifespan is a mere blip relative to macro-civilizational cycles.
So it's essentially the difference between a day trader and a macroeconomist.
That's a great way to put it.
The day trader is staring at a 5-minute stock chart. They are sweating, panicking, pulling their hair out because the line dipped at 10:04 a.m.
Right. In their limited perspective, the entire market is collapsing in real time.
But the macroeconomist is sitting in the next room looking at a massive 10-year cycle chart. They see that the 5-minute dip is completely irrelevant to this steady, decade-long upward trend.
That analogy fits perfectly. To the human actor, a lifetime of 80 years feels like an eternity of struggle. To the system's reckoning, 1,000 human years is just one single day. It is one tick of the clock.
One full operational cycle for a societal cause to produce its ultimate systemic effect.
Exactly. It takes time for the consequences of a civilization's philosophy to fully manifest in the physical world of Alamekalk.
Well, hold on. Let me challenge the implications of this. Because if we are talking about these massive 1,000-year operational cycles of cause and effect, well, it sounds an awful lot like the cyclical theories of history.
Okay, I see where you're going.
Does this just mean history is a giant 1,000-year hamster wheel? Do empires rise, become corrupt, fall into ruin, and then the next group of humans just builds a new empire and makes the exact same mistakes?
Just spinning around?
Yeah. If we're just spinning in a circle, round and round, who cares about the end point? There's no Yudabbir if we're just on a loop.
That is a brilliant pushback. And it's a philosophical trap that many ancient civilizations fell into, actually.
Like who?
The ancient Greek philosophers, the Stoics, many Eastern traditions, they fundamentally believed in a cyclical universe, a closed loop where time eventually resets.
Right.
But Parwez emphatically rejects the cyclical view, and he grounds his rejection in the specific vocabulary of the text itself. The system described here is not a loop, it is a sirat-e-mustaqim.
A straight path.
Yes, a directional path. But the text adds another critical layer. The verse we just discussed uses a very specific word for how these matters ascend or conclude after 1,000 years.
Which word is that?
Uruj. Now, uruj is often loosely translated as going up or ascending, like a balloon floating into the sky.
It's just drifting upward.
Right. But the root of uruj, which gives us words like marij, is intrinsically related to stairs. It means climbing in distinct, law-governed, stable stages.
Stairs. That changes the visual completely. A wheel just spins. A balloon just floats randomly based on the wind. But stairs have structure. They have platforms.
Precisely. The system moves forward and upward. It is highly directional. Think about the history of human civilization. When a great empire falls, whether it's Rome or the Abbasids or the Mayans, it feels like a catastrophic reset to the people living through it.
Like the end of the world.
But the baseline of human knowledge doesn't drop back to zero. The technological capacity, the sociological complexity, the philosophical insights generated by that empire remain.
Oh, I see. So the next civilization starts from that higher stair.
Exactly. We are not trapped in a feudal repeating circle. We are navigating a massive 1,000-year cycle staircase. The initial planning, the Yudabbir, guarantees that the staircase has a top, it has a destination.
Okay, so let's summarize where we are. Because the scale of this is immense. We've established the macro-level architecture. We have a universe that was planned backward from a specific endpoint that's Yudabbir.
Right.
The execution of this plan happens in physical reality over vast operational cycles that completely dwarf a human lifespan. And this entire process moves directionally upward, stage by stage like climbing stairs, rather than spinning in a pointless loop.
That's a great summary.
It's an incredibly robust, optimistic, and systemic view of reality. But the macro view only gets us so far. We need to zoom in.
We do.
We have the cosmic blueprint. Now we need to look at the physical production of the agent meant to navigate this system. We are moving from the cosmos down to the dirt.
We are indeed. And this is where Parwez's analysis of verses 7 and 8 becomes revolutionary, especially considering he delivered this lecture in 1979.
Yeah, the timing is wild.
He moves from the scale of thousand-year civilizational cycles to the literal mud of the earth. The text details the progressive development of the human being, stating explicitly that the creation began from clay, representing raw, inorganic matter.
Right.
And then it moves to what the text calls a despised fluid, which is a metaphorical, perhaps poetic way of describing the biological mechanism of reproduction, sperm, egg, genetics.
And Parwez reads this not as a magical incantation, but as a clear, unequivocal acknowledgement of a developmental evolutionary process in human origins.
Yes. And you have to understand the intellectual climate here. In 1979, the cultural war between religion and biological science was fiercely entrenched.
And frankly, it still is today.
Absolutely. The traditional religious narrative claimed that human beings were created instantly, out of nothing, fully formed in a garden.
The poof theory again.
Right. And the scientific Darwinian narrative countered that humans evolved slowly from single-celled organisms through random mutation and natural selection. It was presented as a zero-sum game. You had to choose one.
Right, the poof theory of instant creation versus the Darwinian slow cook.
Exactly. But Parwez, utilizing the systems engineering framework, steps entirely outside that false dichotomy. He essentially says, you are both missing the point of the text.
Oh, why?
He argues that the Quran is not in conflict with biological science. It is actively synthesizing it.
How so?
The text asserts that the exact same productive law, that thousand-year cycle of uruj, of climbing stairs that governs the macro rise and fall of civilizations, also governs the microbiological sequence.
That is fascinating.
We started as inorganic matter, the clay, and through a massive, phased, physically grueling operational cycle in the Alami Khalq, we developed into biological organisms.
He's saying the biology follows the same blueprint as the sociology.
Precisely.
But I do know that Parwez draws a very hard, uncompromising line against one specific aspect of the modern secular view of evolution. He refers to it as the tyranny of unproven assertions.
Yes, and this is where the systems engineer perspective really shows its teeth. Parwez completely accepts the physical mechanism of evolution.
A slow cook.
He accepts the gradual, step-by-step biological development over millions of years. What he violently rejects is the philosophical leap that many materialistic scientists make.
Which is what?
The assertion that this incredible, complex process is driven solely by blind, random cosmic accidents.
Because randomness fundamentally violates the principle of tadabbur.
Yes.
If the evolutionary process is just a series of lucky dice rolls, then there is no endpoint in mind. There's no reverse engineering.
Precisely. Parwez is arguing from a position of mathematical and systemic logic.
Go.
If you observe a system that reliably, over billions of years, produces increasing biological complexity, ultimately resulting in a conscious creature capable of splitting the atom, mapping the genome, and questioning its own existence.
Right.
It is systemically absurd to claim that the underlying engine of that system is fundamentally random. The text argues that the evolutionary development process is deeply law-governed. It is directional. It is purposeful.
It's operating like an algorithm. And an algorithm isn't random. Even if a machine learning algorithm uses randomized variables to test different pathways, the algorithm itself is optimizing for a specific outcome. The parameters are set.
That is a brilliant modern equivalent. The parameters are set in the Alfa-Amr, and the optimization happens in the physical realm.
Okay.
And the primary mechanism of that optimization, the way the algorithm tests and improves the organism, is through friction. To explain this, Parwez brings in the philosophical concept of evolution as a necessary friction. And he draws heavily on the works of the renowned poet-philosopher Allama Iqbal, whom he quotes extensively throughout the lecture.
Let's really dig into Iqbal's contribution here, because the poetry used in this lecture isn't just decorative. It isn't just there to sound pretty. It is carrying a massive philosophical load. Specifically, the concept of takro.
Takro is a pivotal concept. It translates to collision, struggle, impact, or the overcoming of intense obstacles.
Okay.
Iqbal argues, and Parwez synthesizes this into the commentary, that life, and particularly the evolutionary upward movement of life, is fundamentally defined by heat, by movement, by resistance.
So without resistance, nothing happens.
Without resistance, there is absolutely no evolution. A species that operates in a perfect, frictionless environment, that never faces a predator, a climate shift, or a scarcity of resources, never adapts. It just stagnates and eventually degrades.
Like a muscle.
Yeah.
The muscle only grows when the fibers are torn against resistance.
Exactly. The systemic blueprint requires friction to force the biological matter up the stairs of Eau Rouge.
You know, I was fascinated by this specific analogy Iqbal uses to illustrate this, which Parwez highlights. It's the analogy of the Qatra and Asan, the drop of spring rain.
It's a beautiful image.
According to the classical poetic tradition, this single pure drop of rain falls from the sky. But in its current state, it's just water. To become something of lasting value, to reach a higher stage of existence, it has to undergo immense pressure, friction, and transformation.
Right.
If that drop falls into the ocean and is swallowed by an oyster, it doesn't just rest there. It acts as an irritant. It gets coated in nacre. It endures the immense pressure of the ocean depths, and through that struggle, it becomes a pearl.
Yes.
Or, alternatively, if that drop of rain falls on a vineyard and nourishes a grapevine, it becomes the grape. But the grape's journey isn't over. To reach its highest potential, the grape has to be violently plucked, literally crushed and broken down in the dark to ferment and become a potent wine.
That breaking, the violent crushing of the grape, the dark isolation of the oyster, that is the takro. It is the necessary, unavoidable violence of the evolutionary algorithm.
Wow.
You cannot move to the next stage of systemic complexity without breaking the current form. The old paradigm, the old biological shell, has to shatter to release the higher potential.
It's a deeply beautiful but also brutal reality. And it's frankly astonishing to consider the historical context of this perspective.
It really is.
Up until the 18th or 19th century, pretty much the entirety of human thought, both religious clerics and early scientific thinkers, believed that species just popped into existence exactly as they currently look.
The poof theory held strong for a long time.
But Parwez is demonstrating that this 1,400-year-old text was preemptively describing a step-by-step, gradual, law-governed biological development over millennia, driven explicitly by friction and environmental pressure.
It is a profound historical anomaly that the text maps so perfectly onto the mechanics of evolutionary friction. But as we follow this physical, biological logic, we inevitably arrive at a critical, highly problematic juncture.
Right. And this is where I have to throw down a major pushback.
Go for it.
Because if physical evolution is entirely law-governed, if it's an algorithm driven by friction, environmental pressure, and the survival of the fittest, doesn't that mean humans are just biological robots? Think about it. If we are just the end product of billions of years of optimized takro, are we just highly complex meat algorithms following a deeply embedded survival script?
That's the materialistic view.
Because if we are, then every conversation we have about civilization, ethics, justice, or morality is just a grand illusion. We aren't making choices. We're just fancy ants responding to chemical pheromones. We're just running the survive and replicate program.
And that profound existential question brings us exactly to the precipice of the most important transition in the text. The physical, biological hardware is built. The meat algorithm, as you aptly call it, has been heavily optimized over millions of years of takro. The organism can successfully hunt, survive, reproduce, and adapt to its environment.
It's doing great.
It is a biological success story. But then, in verse 9, the text describes an unprecedented cosmos-altering event.
What happens?
A software upgrade that fundamentally and permanently alters the organism's status in the universe.
This is the moment everything changes. Verse 9 states, quote, "He fashioned him and breathed into him of his spirit." In the original Arabic, the phrase is nafak min ruhi.
Yes, nafak min ruhi, the breath of the spirit.
Okay, we need to stop the train and plant a massive flag right here.
Quite away.
Because century after century, traditional theology and mysticism have built a sprawling, borderline mythological industry around this single phrase. This is the origin of the immortal soul.
Yes, the classic interpretation.
The pervasive idea that there is a literal, metaphysical, shiny, translucent ghost that God inserted into a physical flesh vessel. And the narrative goes that your body is just a dirty, temporary meat sack, And when you die, the ghost pops out and flies away to its true home. It's Cartesian dualism on steroids.
It is the ultimate superstitious crutch. It's a way of avoiding the reality of our physical existence. And Parwez violently, unequivocally pivots away from this dualistic nightmare.
He just tears it down.
Completely. He deconstructs the grammar and the underlying systemic logic of the text to demonstrate just how philosophically absurd the ghost in the machine concept truly is.
He starts by attacking the logic of the divine nature itself.
Yes.
He argues that the divine entity, the architect of the Alam-ER, is an absolute, indivisible whole. It is a singularity. It does not slice off little pieces of itself like a pie and stuff them inside human bodies.
Exactly. It's a logical contradiction. If the architect of the universe is infinite, indivisible, and completely distinct from the material creation, the idea of metaphysical pieces of that architect floating around inside the digestive tracts of bipedal primates is absurd.
It makes no sense from an engineering standpoint.
None. So if it's not a ghost, what does the breath of the divine spirit actually mean within a rigorous systems context?
Yeah, what is it?
Parwez explains that this is not an injection of a substance, it is the endowment of a specific revolutionary capacity. It is the capacity for mashiat.
Mashiat. What exactly does that capacity encompass? Because that sounds like the core of the human operating system.
It is. Mashiat is the umbrella term for free will, autonomous reason, self-reflection, and the capacity for deliberate moral choice.
Oh, wow.
Think about the evolutionary timeline. Up until this exact point in the biological sequence, every living animal acts entirely on instinct. It is perfectly aligned with the physical laws of survival because it literally has no other choice.
Right.
A lion does not agonize over the morality of killing a gazelle. It doesn't consider the gazelle's family. It is simply executing the survival program. The lion is perfectly obedient to the law of Alam-E-Kauk.
The meat algorithm is running flawlessly without any moral friction.
Yes. But Mashiat is the introduction of a radical new variable into the physical universe. It is not metaphysical anatomy. You cannot find Mashiat in an MRI or during an autopsy. It is a description of a higher-order cognitive architecture.
So it's pure software.
It is the installation of the unique faculty that makes the human being capable of actively, consciously aligning with the productive, directional law of the universe. Or, terrifyingly, deliberately choosing to violate it.
Wow. Let that sink in for a second. So the soul isn't a ghost at all. The soul is agency. It's autonomy.
Yes.
It is the cognitive gap between stimulus and response. An animal gets a stimulus and responds instantly based on instinct. A human gets a stimulus, and Mashiat allows us to pause, analyze the data, and choose a response that might even contradict our physical survival instincts.
That's the key difference.
We can choose to sacrifice ourselves for an idea. No animal does that.
Precisely. And the text signals this massive architectural upgrade with what I consider to be one of the most stunning grammatical shifts in all of ancient literature.
I loved this part of the analysis.
Parwez highlights this shift, and it is absolutely brilliant from a systems perspective. Throughout all the preceding verses describing the physical evolution, the progression from clay to fluid, the shaping of the biological body, the text refers to the human organism entirely in the third-person singular.
Like, he created him, he fashioned it.
Yes.
So the text is referring to the human organism as an object. It's a piece of hardware moving passively down the evolutionary assembly line.
Exactly. The organism isn't it. It is a passive recipient of the forces of Takuro and natural selection. But the very microsecond this cognitive architecture, the Nafak Minrui, the capacity for Mashiat is installed, the grammar of the text pivots violently.
How so?
The text abandons the third-person singular and shifts directly into the second-person plural. The word used is kum, meaning you.
Wait, let me just process that. The text literally changes its grammar right when the cognitive upgrade happens.
Yes.
That is unbelievable. This is the exact moment the cosmic system recognizes the user. It is the exact equivalent of upgrading a piece of hardware from a passive data collector, like a smart thermostat that just reacts to temperature, into a fully autonomous, self-aware artificial intelligence.
It's exactly like that.
Suddenly, the system interface doesn't flash a message saying device is operating. The system addresses the entity directly and says, what do you want to do?
It is the ultimate transition from object to subject, from an unconscious it to a conscious you.
That is just wild.
It represents the profound dignity of being addressed directly by the creator of the system. You cannot have a conversation with a rock. You cannot truly address an ant or command a tree to reflect on its existence.
Right.
You can only address an entity that possesses the requisite cognitive architecture to process the address, consider the available options, and autonomously choose a response.
That grammatical shift from he to you is the literal birth of the human agent. The hardware has become self-aware.
It has.
But of course, as the designated skeptic here, I have to challenge the reality of this upgrade. I have to look at the empirical data.
Bring it on.
Because if we have this amazing divine energy endowed within us, this incredible state-of-the-art operating system of free choice and reason, why is human history such a catastrophic, bloody mess?
It's a fair question.
Think about it. Animals run their basic instinctual programming, and the global ecosystem stays in perfect, harmonious balance for millions of years. Humans get the upgrade to Mashiach, and what is the result?
Chaos.
War, genocide, systemic oppression, environmental collapse, and constant suffering. Why is the upgraded agent so incredibly prone to error compared to a simple bird or a fish?
That question cuts to the absolute core of the human condition, and it perfectly transitions us into the next critical phase of Parvez's analysis.
Okay, let's hear it.
The reason human history is messy, violent, and chaotic is directly tied to the burden of this new cognitive architecture. Having a state-of-the-art diagnostic toolkit doesn't guarantee you have the wisdom or the discipline to use it correctly.
Makes sense.
In fact, if you hand a profoundly powerful tool to an entity that misuses it, the resulting damage is exponential compared to an animal's capacity for destruction.
Right.
And verse 9 doesn't just stop at the celebratory installation of the spirit. It immediately follows the upgrade with a very specific, detailed, and almost warning-like phrase.
What does it say?
And he gave you hearing and vision and hearts. Little are you grateful.
So it lists out the tools.
This is where Parvez lays out the ultimate functional diagnostic toolkit provided to the human agent to navigate the Alam-e-Khalq. The text doesn't deal in vague spiritual platitudes. It uses 3 very specific, highly technical Arabic terms: Sam, Basar, and Afida.
We need to break each of these down systemically. Let's start with the first input channel, Sam.
Sam literally translates to hearing, but systemically, sociologically, it means the capacity to receive and gather external information.
So like data collection.
It is the primary data intake valve. It involves listening to the historical record, gathering data from the environment, paying attention to the documented experiences of previous generations, and receiving the codified laws of the system.
So it's not just the physical acoustic vibration in the ear. It's the willingness to actually absorb information outside of your own immediate bubble. If a society ignores history, they are failing at Sam.
Got
it. Next is Bizarre.
Bizarre translates to vision or sight, but, again, we must look deeper than mere optical function.
Okay.
Bizarre is the cognitive capacity for keen observation, for empirical analysis, and for witnessing cause and effect in the real world. It is the scientific method applied to sociology.
Give me an example of that.
It means you observe that when a society implements policy X, say, extreme wealth inequality, the observable, empirical result over time is why societal collapse and revolution.
So Sam is gathering the raw historical and environmental data. Bizarre is actively observing the patterns and the empirical cause and effect relationships within that data. But data and observation alone don't make a decision. A security camera has vision, a microphone has hearing, but they don't think.
They just record.
Right.
Yeah.
That brings us to the third tool, Afida. Now, standard translations usually render this word as hearts, which to a modern listener sounds incredibly emotional, romantic, and totally out of place in a systems engineering discussion.
And that standard translation is a massive, highly detrimental mistranslation in tone.
Really?
Yes. In classical Quranic Arabic, the heart, whether the word is qalb or afida, is absolutely not the seat of emotion, romance, or sentimental feeling. It is the integrative reasoning center. It is the processor.
It's the CPU of the human cognitive architecture.
Exactly. The afida is the critical faculty that takes the raw historical data gathered by Sam's hearing, combines it with the empirical patterns observed by Bisar, synthesizes that massive flow of information, weighs the potential outcomes, and makes an autonomous, rational, moral decision.
Sam, Bizarre, Afida. Data, observation, reason.
That triad constitutes the complete state-of-the-art cognitive toolkit required to successfully navigate the physical universe and align with the macro blueprint.
And understanding that toolkit brings us to a foundational concept that Parwes focuses on heavily to explain human suffering. Mukafade amal, the law of requital or the absolute law of consequence.
This is a critical piece of the puzzle. The universe, the Alami Kalk, operates on absolute, unflinching consequence. But the law of requital is perfectly just.
How so?
It does not punish an agent for lacking tools they were never given. A lion is not morally punished for killing a zebra. It lacks the affida to consider alternatives.
Right.
A human child with an undeveloped prefrontal cortex is not held responsible for complex moral failures. The law of requital operates strictly and solely on what the conscious agent does with the specific tools they possess.
Which completely and radically redefines the end of that verse. The verse ends with the phrase, "Little are you grateful."
Yes, it does.
I have to admit, growing up, I always read that through a very human, sentimental lens. I read it as God complaining that humans aren't saying thank you enough, like a disappointed parent on a birthday.
Right. You didn't say thanks.
Yeah, like, I bought you all these amazing biological toys, I gave you eyes and ears, and you didn't even write me a thank you note. It sounded petty.
That is the standard sentimental theological reading, and Parwes completely dismantles it.
How does he frame it?
In a systems engineering framework, the concept of ingratitude, the Arabic word is kufr, or nashukri, is not a failure of politeness. It has nothing to do with saying thank you.
Then what is it?
Ingratitude means you have been handed a complete, state-of-the-art, billion-year-in-the-making diagnostic kit for navigating civilizational reality, your hearing, your observation, your integrative reasoning, and you are leaving it entirely unutilized.
Oh, wow.
You are actively choosing to act like a biological robot driven by instinct when you physically possess the hardware of a highly conscious, autonomous agent.
You're using a quantum supercomputer as a doorstop. You're taking the most advanced cognitive architecture in the known universe and using it solely to figure out how to eat, sleep, and accumulate shiny objects, exactly like a raccoon, just with better technology.
Precisely. That is systemic ingratitude. And this is where Parwes offers a searing, almost prophetic critique of the purely Western, materialistic view of human evolution.
Let's hear it.
He points out a terrifying existential danger that happens when you separate the hardware from its intended destination.
Let's really unpack this critique. Because even though he's delivering this lecture in 1979, the Cold War era, it feels like he is staring directly at the global crises we are facing today. What is the danger of materialism in this framework?
He argues that if an agent is taught, fundamentally and philosophically, that their only goal in life is physical survival, dominance, and resource extraction, which is the biological mandate of an animal, but they happen to possess the advanced cognitive toolkit, the affida, capable of inventing nuclear weapons, mapping the genome, or creating artificial intelligence.
Yeah.
The result is inevitable, catastrophic self-destruction.
Hiroshima, climate collapse, the weaponization of biology.
Yes. Vast, unprecedented power without a systemic destination. If you philosophically believe you are just a highly intelligent animal competing in a zero-sum game for limited resources, your reasoning center, your affida, won't optimize for justice or macro stability.
It'll just optimize for winning the game.
It will simply optimize for lethality, efficiency, and extraction. You will use your massive intellect to build better weapons to secure better resources because you are convinced that the ultimate goal of existence is just surviving the meat algorithm a little longer than your neighbor.
So having the toolkit, having reason, science, and technology without a higher systemic destination is literally like strapping a massive jet engine onto a rusted bicycle.
That's a great image.
The jet engine doesn't miraculously turn the bicycle into an airplane. It just guarantees that the bicycle is going to hurtle forward at an uncontrollable speed and end in a fiery, spectacular crash. The basic frame of an animal cannot handle the propulsion of a godlike intellect without a steering mechanism.
That is the perfect, terrifying analogy. The Western materialistic paradigm provided the jet engine. It delivered incredible, awe-inspiring scientific and technological advancement through the vigorous use of bizarre observation.
Right.
But it stripped away the steering, it erased the ultimate destination. By defining humans merely as smart animals, it conceptually reduced the human agent back to the third-person singular, back to being an it violently fighting other its in the dark.
Okay, this demands a massive pivot in our discussion. If the animal is perfectly aligned with the physical laws of survival, what exactly is the human supposed to align with?
The blueprint.
If we aren't just animals with jet engines strapped to our backs, what is the actual destination? Where are we supposed to be steering the bicycle?
This is the culmination of the blueprint. We've traced the system from the cosmos to the mud through the upgrade to the toolkit. Now we arrive at the synthesis, permanence, change, and the ultimate destination.
We have to clearly answer the question of destination. Because as we established way back at the beginning with the concept of Tadabbur, the universe is a directional system. It was engineered backward from a specific endpoint.
Right.
So if we fire up our Afida, our reasoning center, where exactly are we supposed to aim it?
Parwez points to the recurring Quranic definition of the ultimate systemic destination, ila rabbikal muntaha. To your Lord is the finality or the ultimate destination.
Now, I have to be honest, massive warning bells are going off for me here.
I can imagine.
And probably for anyone listening who has studied Eastern philosophy or classical mysticism.
Yeah.
Because to your Lord is, the finality sounds exactly like the mystical Sufi or Vedanta concept of ego death.
Ah, yes. The drop in the ocean.
The pervasive idea that you are just a tiny drop of water. You go through the painful trials of life, and at the final destination, you merge back into the great cosmic ocean of God and disappear. Nirvana, the total loss of individual identity.
And Parwez draws a razor-sharp, absolutely uncompromising line in the sand here.
Oh, really?
He argues vehemently that merging back into the cosmic ocean and losing your individuality is not the goal. In fact, within this rigorous systems framework, dissolving into the whole is the ultimate system failure. It's the catastrophic loss of the individual agent.
Wait, really? The goal of this incredibly complex spiritual and evolutionary journey is not to lose yourself.
Absolutely not. Think about the massive evolutionary effort we just mapped out. Think about the billions of years of Takro, the brutal friction of natural selection, the agonizing thousand-year cycles of Uruj.
That's a lot of work.
All of that immense systemic effort was expended just to produce a highly conscious agent capable of saying I, an agent capable of being addressed by the cosmos as you.
Right.
Why on earth would the master architect design a system that does all that agonizing work to create an autonomous node only to hit the delete key at the end and dissolve the agent back into the background noise of the universe?
That makes total logical sense. You don't spend $1 billion in a decade of engineering developing a highly sophisticated autonomous rover to send to Mars just to drive it directly into a volcano so it can become one with the Martian crust.
Exactly.
You want it to operate. You want it to gather data. You want it to exist as a distinct, functioning node in the system.
Precisely. The true destination, the Ila Rabbikal Muntaha, is for the human agent to stand fully actualized as an independent, highly conscious, deeply developed node within the system.
Do what exactly?
The goal is to consciously, voluntarily reflect the divine attributes. Attributes like boundless creativity, absolute justice, sustaining others, and profound mercy within the finite constraints of human capacity.
So you become a mirror.
Yes. Parwez calls this state of being a bandai mala sifat. It means becoming an autonomous agent that actively reflects the core attributes of the master system.
So you maintain your absolute you-ness, your distinct individual borders, but your you-ness is perfectly harmoniously aligned with the system's highest operational parameters.
That's exact.
You aren't swallowed by the ocean. You become a perfect mirror reflecting the light of the ocean.
You integrate into the harmony of the blueprint without ever losing your borders. And understanding this allows us to grasp the ultimate synthesis of the text, which Parwez frames as the dynamic balance between permanence and change.
Okay, let's break that down because a robust system needs both. What is permanent in the human condition and what changes.
The permanent principle is the hardware and the diagnostic toolkit.
The Sam, Basar, and Afida.
Exactly. The fundamental cognitive architecture of the human being does not change from generation to generation. We are uniquely and permanently equipped to read and align with the productive law of the universe through our hearing, observing, and reasoning.
So our innate ability to gather data, observe empirical reality, and reason integratively is a locked specification.
It is locked. That hardware was the same 1,400 years ago in the desert. It was the same in 1979 during the Cold War, and it remains identical today in the age of quantum computing.
The hardware spec is locked. The capacity for reason is permanently installed. So what changes?
The change is the surrounding environment, the level of technology, the sociological complexity. But most importantly, what changes are the excuses.
The excuses, yes. How humanity avoids using the toolkit.
Every single era, every rising and falling civilization in that 1,000-year cycle invents its own highly customized, culturally fashionable excuse for not using these critical faculties.
We're really good at finding reasons not to think.
We are. The text's ultimate diagnostic of human failure is that we constantly, desperately look for ways to shut down the AFIDA, the Integrative Reasoning Center.
Because genuine reasoning is hard. It requires mental takra, it requires internal friction, admitting you are wrong and facing uncomfortable truths.
Exactly. It is always biologically easier to shut off the CPU and revert to the meat algorithm.
So what do those civilizational excuses actually look like in practice? How do we shut down the tools?
Historically, it takes many forms. In ancient, deeply conservative times, the primary excuse was blind tradition.
Just following the ancestors.
Right. The cultural narrative was, don't question the reasoning of the ancestors, just do what your forefathers did. That perfectly shuts down the AFIDA. You don't have to think, you just copy.
And in other eras.
In tyrannical or dictatorial societies, the excuse is unjust authority. The narrative is, don't look at the empirical consequences of the leader's policies, just obey the dictator.
That effectively shuts down the basar, the power of observation, become willfully blind.
Yes, you do.
And what about today? Because we don't think of ourselves as ancient or blindly obedient. We think we're highly advanced. What is the modern 21st century excuse for shutting down our cognitive architecture?
Today, the excuse is far more insidious. It is modern comfort and algorithmic distraction.
Oof, that hits close to home.
The implicit narrative of our current technological era is, don't think too deeply. Don't engage with the friction of complex moral reasoning. Just consume this endless, frictionless stream of dopamine.
Let the algorithm curate your news. Let the AI make your choices. Let the echo chamber gather your data.
It is the ultimate voluntary abdication of the nafaq bin Rui. By outsourcing our reasoning to external machines, we voluntarily downgrade ourselves back to the third-person singular.
We become passive such again.
Exactly. We become optimized data points for corporations rather than autonomous reasoning agents.
We literally turn the jet engine off, sit on the rusted bicycle, and just scroll on our phones while the world burns around us.
Sadly, yes.
That is a chilling, undeniably accurate synthesis of our modern condition. The sociological impact of this 1,400-year-old text is staggering, because its diagnostic power is completely agnostic to the century you live in.
It applies everywhere.
Whether you're a nomadic trader in 7th century Arabia, a scholar in 1979 Pakistan, or a listener today navigating AI, deepfakes, and global crises, the system audit asks the exact same uncompromising question. You have the tools, you have the data gathering, the empirical observation, and the integrative reasoning center. What are you doing with them?
That is the enduring, inescapable challenge of the blueprint. The universe is running on a massive, directional, 1,000-year operational cycle.
Yeah. The choices we make, the consequences of how we utilize our cognitive architecture today will inevitably echo into the macro cycle of tomorrow. We are building the stairs for the next generation.
And that brings us to the end of this truly massive journey. Let's just briefly pull the lens all the way back and recap the immense ground we've covered today.
It's been a long journey.
We started at the absolute macro design of civilizational consequence, the concept of tadabbur. The universe engineered backward from its ultimate destination, operating on a scale where 1,000 human years is just a single day of system time.
From that cosmic blueprint, we moved down into the dirt, into the alamic calc.
We witnessed the necessity of takrao.
Yes, the friction of biological evolution. Understanding the grueling, law-governed process of inorganic clay progressively transforming into complex biological life.
Then we examine the incredible pivot point of existence, the installation of the cognitive architecture.
The upgrade. We exploded the myth of the spooky metaphysical ghost, replacing it with a profound capacity for mashiat, free will, reason, and moral choice. We saw the cosmos shift its grammar, addressing the human agent not as an it, but directly as a you.
And finally, we mapped out the operational diagnostic toolkit: SAM, BASAR, and AFIDA hearing, seeing, and integrative reasoning.
We confronted the stark warning that possessing this advanced toolkit without aiming it at the proper destination, which is reflecting the highest attributes of the system as an independent node, inevitably leads to self-destruction. The jet engine strapped to the bicycle.
It is a phenomenal, rigorous framework for understanding our place in the universe.
So I want to leave you, the listener, with a lingering thought experiment. Bring yourself fully into this conversation. We talked at the very beginning about that broken X-ray machine, the murky, confusing waters of diagnosing human existence. Well, you now have the systemic blueprint.
You have the tools.
Tomorrow morning, when you wake up, when you grab your phone, when you face the friction of your daily life, take a hard look at your own immediate environment.
Are you currently running on the automated biological programming of survival, comfort, and distraction?
Are you letting society's current fashionable excuse, whether that's political tribalism or algorithmic apathy, shut down your hardware? Or are you actively firing up your AFIDA? Are you using your integrative reasoning center to deeply process the data you hear and the cause and effect you see?
It is the most vital system audit you can perform.
Remember, in a macro system where consequence cycles operate on a scale of 1,000 years, the only thing that truly echoes into the future is the deliberate, conscious choice you make today. You are not a ghost trapped in a meat machine. You are the operator of the most sophisticated cognitive architecture in the cosmos. The system is asking you. So, what is your hardware aimed at right now? Keep questioning the blueprints of your own reality. We'll catch you on the next deep dive.